Good night, everybody. And tonight's story is called The Will, and it was written by Mary Lavin. I couldn't say what I thought while he was here, said Kate, the eldest of the family, closing the door after the solicitor, who had just read out their mother's will to the Conroy family. She ran over to her youngest sister and threw out her hands. I can't tell you how shocked I am, Lolly. We'd no idea that she felt as bitter against you as all that, had we? She turned and appealed to the other members of the family who stood around the large red mahogany table in their stiff black mourning clothes. I knew she felt bitter, said Matthew, the eldest of the sons. We couldn't mention your name without raising a row. She knocked over the lamp once, said Nanny, the youngest of the unmarried members. Of late years, she always kept a stick beside her on the counterpane of the bed, and she tapped with it on the floor when she wanted anything. And then one day, someone said something about you. I forget what it is they said, but she caught up that stick and drove it through the air with all her force. The next thing we knew, the lamp was reeling off the table. The house would have been burnt down about us if the lamp hadn't quenched with the draught of falling through the air. Still, even after that, we never thought that she'd leave your name out of the parchment altogether, did we? Kate corroborated every remark by an appeal to the rest of the group. We thought she'd leave you something anyway, no matter how small it might be. But I don't mind, said Lally. Honestly, I don't. I wish you didn't feel so bad about it, all of you. She looked around from one to the other beseechingly. Why wouldn't we feel bad, said Matthew. You're our own sister, after all. She was your mother as well as ours, no matter what happened. The only thing I regret, said Lally, was that I didn't get here before she died. The tears started into her eyes. I don't think it would have made any difference whether you got here in time or not before she went. That will was made years ago. Oh, I didn't mean anything like that, said Lally in dismay, and a red blush struggled through the thickened cells of her skin. I only meant to say that I'd like to have seen her, no matter what, before she went. The tears streamed down her face then, and they ran freely, for her mind was far away, thinking of the days before she left home at all. She made no attempt to dry her eyes, but the tears upset the others, who felt no inclination to cry. Having watched the old lady fade away in a long, lingering illness, they'd used up their emotional energy in anticipating grief. Their minds were filled now with practical arrangements. Don't upset yourself, Lally, said Kate. Perhaps it all turned out for the best. If she'd seen you, she might only have flown into one of her rages and died sitting up in the bed from a rush of blood to the forehead, instead of the nice, natural death that she did get, lying straight out, with her hands folded better than any undertaker could have folded them. Everything happened for the best. I don't suppose she mentioned my name, did she? Near the end, I mean. No, the last time she spoke about you was so long ago I couldn't at least rightly say now when it was. It was one night that she was feeling bad. She hadn't slept the night before. I was tidying her room for her, plumping up her pillows, and one thing and another, and she was looking out the window. Suddenly she looked at me and asked me how old you were now. It gave me such a start to hear her mention your name after all those years that I couldn't remember what age you were, so I just said the first thing that came into my head. What did she say? She said nothing for a while, and then she began to ramble about something under her breath. I couldn't catch the meaning. She used to wander a bit in her mind now and again, especially if she had lost her sleep the night before. Do you think it was me she was talking about under her breath, said Lally, and her eyes and her open lips and even the half gesture of her outstretched hands seemed to beg for an answer in the affirmative. Oh, I don't know what she was rambling about, said Kate. I had my mind fixed on getting the bed straightened out so she could lie back at her ease. I wasn't listening to what she was saying. All I remember is that she was saying something about blue feathers. Blue feathers. Her mind was astray for the time being, I suppose. The tears glistened in Lally's eyes again. I had 2 little blue feathers in my hat the morning I went into her room to tell her I was getting married. I'd nothing new to put on me. I was wearing my old green silk costume and my old green hat, but I bought 2 little pale blue feathers and pinned them on the front of the hat. I think the feathers upset her more than going against her wishes with the marriage. She kept staring at them all the time I was in the room, and even when she ordered me to get out of her sight, it was at the feathers in my hat she was staring, and not at me. Don't cry, Lally. Kate felt uncomfortable. Don't cry. It's all over long ago. Don't be going back to the past. What is to be is to be. I always believed that. Matthew and Nonny believed that too. They told her not to cry. They said no good would be done by upsetting yourself. I never regretted it, said Lally. We'd a hard time at the beginning, but I never regretted it. Kate moved over and began to straighten the red plush curtains as if they'd been the sole object of her change in position. But the movement brought her close to her thin brother Matthew, where he stood fingering his chin uncertainly. Kate gave him a sharp nudge. Say what I told you, she said, speaking rapidly in a low voice. Matthew cleared his throat. You've no need for regret as far as we're concerned, Lally, he said, and he looked back at Kate, who nodded her head vigorously for him to continue. We didn't share our poor mother's feelings. Of course, we couldn't help thinking that you could have done better for yourself, but it's all past mending now, and we want you to know that we will do all in our power for you. He looked again at his sister Kate, who nodded her head still more vigorously, indicating that the most important thing had still been left unsaid. We won't see you in want, said Matthew. When this much had been said, Kate felt that her brother's authority had been deferred to sufficiently, and she broke into the conversation again. We won't let it be said by anyone that we'd see you in want, Lally. We talked it all over. We can make an arrangement. She looked across at Matthew again with a glance that seemed to toss the conversation to him, as one might toss a ball. We were thinking, said Matthew, that if each one of us was to part with a small sum, the total would come to a considerable amount when it was all put together. But Lally put her hands up again. Oh, no, 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 she said. I wouldn't want anything that didn't come to me by rights. It should only be a small sum from each one, said Nonny placatingly. No one would feel any pinch. No, 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 said Lally. I couldn't let you do that. It would be going against her wishes. It's late in the day you let the thought of going against her wishes trouble you, said Kate, with an involuntary flash of impatience for which she hurried to atone by the next remark. Why wouldn't you take it? It's yours as much as ours. You might have put it like that anyhow, said Matthew, as long as we're not speaking legally. No, 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 said Lally for the third time. Don't you see? I'd hate taking it and knowing all the time that she didn't intend me to have it. And anyway, you have to think of yourselves. She looked at Kate. You've your children to educate, she said. You've this place to keep up, Matthew, and you've no one to look after you at all, Nanny. I won't take a penny from any of you. What about your own children, said Kate. Are you forgetting them? Oh, they're all right, said Lally. Things are different in the city. In the city there are plenty of free schools, and I'm doing very well. Every room in the house is full. There was silence after that for a few minutes, but glances passed between Kate and Nonny. Kate went over to the fire and picked up the poker. She drove it in among the blazing coals and rattled them up with such unusual violence that Matthew looked around at her, where she knelt on the red carpet. Do you have to be prompted at every word, said Kate, when she got his attention. Matthew cleared his throat again, and this time, at that sound, Lally turned towards him expectantly. There's another thing that we were talking about before you arrived, he said, speaking quickly and nervously. It would be in the interests of the family, Lally, if you were to give up keeping lodgers. He looked at her quickly to see how she took what he said, and then he stepped back a pace or two like an actor who'd said his lines and made way for another person to say his. While he was speaking, Kate had remained kneeling at the grate with the poker in her hand, but when he stopped, she made a move to rise quickly. Her stiff new morning skirt got in the way, however, and the cold and damp of the graveside had brought about an unexpected return of rheumatism, and so, as she went to rise up quickly, she listed forward with the jerky movement of a camel. It couldn't be certain whether Lally was laughing at Matthew's words or at the camelish appearance of Kate. Kate, however, was the first to take offence, but she attributed the laughing to Matthew's words. "I don't see what there is to laugh at, Lally," she said. "It's not a very nice thing for us to feel that our sister is a common landlady in the city. Mother never forgave that. She might have forgiven your marriage in time, but she couldn't forgive you for lowering yourself to keep lodgers." "We had to live somehow," said Lally, but she spoke lightly, and as she spoke she was picking off the green flies from the plant on the table. "I can't say I blame Mother," said Nanny, breaking into the discussion with a sudden venom. "I don't see why you were so anxious to marry him when it meant keeping lodgers." "It was the other way round, Nanny," said Lally. "I was willing to keep lodgers because it meant I could marry him." "Easy now," said Matthew. "There's no need to quarrel. We must talk this thing through over calmly. We'll come to some arrangement, but there's no need in doing everything the one day. Tomorrow is as good as today, and better. Lally must be tired after travelling all the way down and then going on to the funeral without 5 minutes rest. We'll talk it all over in the daylight tomorrow." Lally looked back and forth from one face to another as if she was picking the face that looked most lenient before she spoke again. At last she turned back to Matthew. "I won't be here in the morning," she said hurriedly, as if it were a matter of no consequence. "I'm going back tonight. I only came down for the funeral. I can't stay any longer." "Why not?" demanded Kate, and then, as if she knew the answer to the question and did not want to hear it upon her sister's lips, she continued to speak hurriedly. "You've got to stay," she said, stamping her foot. "You've got to stay. That's all there is to say about the matter." "There's nothing to be gained by my staying anyway," said Lally. "I wouldn't take the money no matter what was said, tonight or tomorrow." Matthew looked at his other sisters. They nodded at him. "There's nothing to be gained by being obstinate, Lally," he said lamely. "You may think you're behaving unselfishly," said Kate, "but let me tell you it's not a nice thing for my children to feel that their first cousins are going to the free schools in the city and mixing with the lowest of the low and running messages for your dirty lodgers. And as if that wasn't bad enough, I suppose you'll be putting them behind the counter in some greengrocer's one of these days." Lally said nothing. "If you kept a hotel it wouldn't seem so bad," said Matthew, looking up suddenly with an animation that betrayed the fact that he was speaking for the first time upon his own initiative. "If you kept a hotel, we could make it a limited company. We could all take shares. We could recommend it to the right kind of people. We could stay there ourselves whenever we were in the city." His excitement grew with every word he uttered. He turned from Lally to Kate. "That's not a bad idea, is it?" He turned back to Lally again. "You'll have to stay the night now," he said enthusiastically, showing that he had not believed before that it was worth her while to comply with their wishes. "I can't stay," said Lally faintly. "Of course you can." Matthew dismissed her difficulties unheard. "You'll have to stay," he said. "Your room is ready, isn't it?" "It's all ready," said Nanny. "I told them to light a fire in it and to put a hot jar in the bed." As an afterthought she explained further. "We were going to fix up a room for you here, but with all the fuss we didn't have time to attend to it, and I thought that the simplest thing to do was to send out word to the station hotel that they were to fix up a nice room for you. They have the room all ready. I went out to see it. It's a big airy room with a nice big bed. It has 2 windows and it looks out on the ball alley. You'll be more comfortable there than here. Of course, I could put a stretcher into my room if you liked, but I think for your own sake you ought to leave things as I arranged them. You'll get a better night's rest. If you sleep here, it might only remind you of things you'd rather forget." I'm very grateful to you, Nanny, for all the trouble you took. I'm grateful to all of you, but I can't stay. Why? Said someone then, voicing the look in every face. I have things to attend to. What things? Different things. You wouldn't understand. They can wait. No, said Lally, I must go. There's a woman coming in tonight to the room on the landing, and I'll have to be there to help her settle in her furniture. Have you got her address? Said Matthew. Why? Said Lally. You could send her a telegram, cancelling the arrangement. Oh, but it would leave her in such a hobble, said Lally. What do you care? You'll never see her again. When we start the hotel, you'll be getting in a different class of person altogether. I'll never start a hotel, said Lally. I won't make any change now. I'd hate to be making a lot of money and Robert gone, where he couldn't profit by it. It's too late now. I'm too old now. She looked down at her thin hands with the broken fingernails and the fine web of lines deepened by dirt, and as she did so, the others looked at her too. They all looked at her, at this sister that was younger than all of them, and a chill descended on them as if they read their own decay in hers. They had been better preserved, that was all. Hardship had hastened the disintegration of her looks, but the undeniable bending of the bone, the tightening of the skin, and the fading of the eye could not be guarded against. A chill fell on them. A grudge against her gnawed at them. I begin to see, said Matthew, that Mother was right. I begin to see what she meant when she said that you were as obstinate as a tree. Did she say that? Said Lally, and her face lit up for a moment with the sunlight of youth as her mind opened wide in a wilful vision of tall trees, leafy and glossy with light, against a sky as blue as the feathers in a young girl's hat. Nanny stood up impatiently. What's the use of talking, she said. No one can do anything for an obstinate person. They must be left to get on their own way, but no one can say we didn't do our best. I'm very grateful, said Lally again. Oh, keep your thanks to yourself, said Nanny. As Matthew said, we didn't do it for your sake. It's not very nice to have people coming back from the city saying that they met you, and we knowing all the time the old clothes you were likely to be wearing, and your hair all tats and taws, and your face dirty maybe, if all was told. Do you ever look at yourself in the mirror? Said Matthew. What came over you that you let your teeth go so far? Said Kate. They're disgusting to look at. She shivered. I'd be ashamed to be seen talking to you, said Nanny. Through the silent evening air there was a far sound of a train shunting. Through the curtains the signal lights on the railway line could be seen changing from red to green. Even when the elderly maidservant came in with the heavy brass lamp, the green light shone through the pane, insistent as a thought. What time is it? Said Lally. You've plenty of time, said Matthew. His words marked the general acceptance of the fact that she was going. Tea was hurried in on a tray. A messenger was sent running upstairs to see if Lally's gloves were on the bed in Kate's room. Where did you leave them? Someone kept asking every few minutes and going away in the confusion without a satisfactory answer. Do you want to have a wash? Nanny asked. It'll freshen you up for the journey. I left a jug of water on the landing. And once or twice, lowering his voice to a whisper, Matthew leaned across the table and asked her if she was absolutely certain that she was all right for the journey back. Had she a return ticket? Had she loose change for the porters? But Lally didn't need anything, and when it came nearer to the time of the train, it appeared that she did not even want the car to take her to the station. But it's wet, said Matthew. It's as dark as a pit outside, said Kate. And all of them, even the maidservant who was clearing away the tray, were agreed that it was bad enough for people to know she was going back the very night that her mother was lowered into the clay, without adding to the scandal by giving people a chance to say that her brother Matthew wouldn't drive her to the train in his car, and it pouring rain. They'd say we had a difference of opinion over the will, said Nanny, who retained one characteristic at least of youth, its morbid sensitivity. What does it matter what they say, said Lally, as long as we know it isn't true. If everyone took that attitude, it would be a queer world, said Matthew. "There's such a thing as keeping up appearances," said Kate, and she threw a hard glance at Lally's coat. "Is that coat black or is it blue?" she asked suddenly, catching the sleeve of it and pulling it nearer to the lamp. "It's almost black," said Lally. "It's a very dark blue. I didn't have time to get proper mourning, and the woman next door lent me this. She said you couldn't tell it from black." Nanny shrugged her shoulders and addressed herself to Matthew. "She's too proud to accept things from her own, but she's not too proud to accept things from strangers." A train whistle shrilled through the air. "I must go," said Lally. She shook hands with them all. She looked up the stairway that the coffin had been carried down that morning. She put her hand on the door. While they were persuading her again to let them take her in the car, she opened the door and ran down the street. They heard her footsteps on the pavement in the dark, as they had heard them often when she was a young girl running up the town on a message for their mother. And just as in those days when she threw a coat over her head with the sleeves dangling and ran out, the door was wide open upon the darkness. Matthew hesitated for a minute, and then he closed the door. "Why didn't you insist?" said Kate. "With people like Lally, there's no use wasting your breath. They have their own ways of looking at things, and nothing will change them. You might as well try to catch a falling leaf as try to find out what's at the back of Lally's mind." They stood in the cold hallway. Suddenly Kate began to cry awkwardly. "Why are you crying now?" said Nanny. "You were great at the cemetery. You kept us all from breaking down. Why are you crying now?" Her own voice had thinned, and she dug her fingers into Matthew's sleeve. "It's Lally," said Kate. "None of you remember her as well as I do. I made her a dress for her first dance. It was white muslin with blue bows all down the front. Her hair was like a light." Kate sobbed with thick, hurtful sobs that shook her whole frame, and shook Matthew's thin, dried-up body when he put his arm around her. Lally ran down along the dark streets of the country town as she had run along them long ago as a young girl, and hardly remembered to slacken into the walking pace when she came to the patches of yellow sunlight that flooded out from shop windows and the open doors of houses near the square. But the excitement of running now had caused the beat of blood in her temple and the terrible throbbing of her heart. As a child it had been an excitement of the mind, for then it had seemed that the bright world ringed the town around, and that somewhere outside the darkness lay the mystery of life. One had only to run on past the old town gate, on under the dark railway bridge, on a little way out the twisty road, and you could reach the heart of that mystery. Some day she would go. And one day she went. But there was no mystery now anywhere. Life was just the same in the town, in the city, in the twisty countryside. Life was the same in the darkness and the light. It was the same for the spinster and for the draggled mother of a family. You were yourself always, no matter where you went or what you did. You didn't change. Her brothers and sisters were the same as they always were. She herself was the same as she always was, although her teeth were rotted and a blue feather in her hat would now make her look like an old hag in a pantomime. Nothing you did made any real change in you. You might think beforehand that it would make a great change, but it wouldn't make any change. There was only one thing that could change you, and that was death. And no one knew what that would be like. No one knew what death was like, but people made terrible, torturing guesses. Fragments of the old penny catechism she had learnt by rote in school came back to her, distorted by a bad memory and a confused emotion. Pictures of flames and screaming souls writhing on gridirons rose before her mind as she ran down the street to the station. The whistle of the train, when it screamed into the darkness, gave a reality to her racing thoughts, and she paused and listened to it for a moment. Then, turning rapidly around, she ran a few paces in the way that she had come and groped along the dark wall that lined the street at this point. The wet black railings of a gate came in contact with her fingers. This was the gate leading into the residence of the canon. She banged the gate back against the piers with the fierce determination with which she opened it. She ran up the wet, gravelly drive to the priest's house. In the dark, she could not find the brass knocker, and she beat against the panels of the door with her hard hands. The door was thrown open after a minute with a roughness that matched the rough knocking. "What in the name of God do you want?" said an elderly woman with an apron that blazed white in the darkness. "I want to see the canon," said Lally. "He's at his dinner," said the woman aggressively, and went to close the door. "I must see him," said Lally, and she stepped into the hallway. "I can't disturb him at his meal," said the woman, but her anger had softened somewhat at seeing that Lally was a stranger to her. Two emotions cannot exist together, and a strong curiosity possessed her at the moment. "What name?" she said. "Lally Conroy," said Lally. The old associations being so strong that her maiden name came more naturally to her lips than the name she had carried for 24 years. The housekeeper went across the hall and opened a door on the left. She closed it after her, but the lock did not catch and the door slid open again. Lally heard the conversation distinctly, but with indifference, as she sat down on the polished mahogany chair in the hall. "There's a woman outside who insists on seeing you, Father." "Who is she?" said the priest, his voice muffled as if by a serviette wiped across his mouth. "She gave her name as Conroy," said the woman, "and she has a look of Matthew Conroy, but I never saw her before, and she's dressed like a pauper." The priest's voice was slow and meditative. "I heard that there was another sister," he said, "but there was a sad story about her. I forget what it was." A chair scraped back. "I'll see her," he said, and his feet sounded on the polished floor as he crossed the room towards the hall. Lally was sitting on the stiff chair with the wooden seat, shielding her face from the heat of the flames that dragged themselves like serpents along the logs in the fireplace. "Father, I'm in a hurry. I'm going away on this train." The train had shrilled its whistle once again in the darkness outside. "I'm sorry to disturb you. I only wanted to ask a question." Her short phrases leaped uncontrollably as the leaping flames in the grate. "I want to know if you'll say a mass for my mother first thing in the morning. My name is Lally Conroy. I'll send you the offering money the minute I get back to the city. I'll post it tonight. Will you do that, Father, will you?" As if the interview was over, she stood up and began to go towards the door, backwards, without waiting for an answer, repeating her urgent question. "Will you? Will you do that, Father, first thing in the morning?" The canon took out a watch from under the cape of his shiny canonical robes. "You've 6 minutes yet," he said. "Sit down, sit down." No, said Lally. "I mustn't miss the train." The whistle blew again, and the sound seemed to race her thoughts to a gallop. "I want 3 masses to be said," she explained, "but I want the first one to be said at once tomorrow, first thing in the morning. You'll have the offering money as soon as I get back. I'll post it tonight." The canon looked at the shabby boots and the thick stockings, the rubbed coat with the faded stitching on it. "There's no need to worry about masses. She was a good woman," he said, "and I understand that she left a large sum in her will for masses to be said for her after her death. £300, I believe, or thereabouts. A very considerable sum at any rate. There's no need for worry on that score. It's not the same thing to leave money yourself for masses. It's the masses that other people have said for you that count." Her excitement leaped like the leaping flames. "I want a mass said for her with my money. With my money." The priest leaned forward with an unusual and ungovernable curiosity. "Why?" he said. "I'm afraid," said Lally. "I'm afraid she might suffer. I'm afraid for her soul." The eyes that stared into the flaming heart of the fire were indeed filled with fear, and as a coal fell, revealing a gaping abyss of fire, those eyes filled with absolute horror. The reflection of the flames leaped in them. She was very bitter. Lally Conroy sobbed for the first time since she had news of her mother's death. "She was very bitter against me all the time, and she died without forgiving me. I'm afraid for her soul." She looked up at the priest. "You'll say them as soon as ever you can, Father." "I'll say them," said the priest, "but don't worry about the money. I'll offer them from myself." "That's not what I want," said the laddie angrily. "I want them to be paid for with my money. That is what will count most, that they're paid for out of my money." Humbly the priest, in his stiff canonical robes, piped with red, accepted the dictates of the draggled woman in front of him. "I will do as you wish," he said. "Is there anything else troubling you?" The train," said Lally, and she fumbled to catch the door. The priest took out his watch again. "You've just time to catch it," he said, "if you hurry," and he opened the door. Lally ran out into the dark again. For a moment she felt peace at the thought of what she had done, and running down the wet, gravelly drive with the cold rain beating on her flushed face, her mind was filled with practical thoughts about the journey home. But when she got into the hot and stuffy carriage of the train, where there was an odour of dust and of wet soot, the tears began to stream down her face again, and she began to wonder if she'd made herself clear to the canon. She put her head out of the carriage window as the train began to leave the platform, and she called out to a porter who stood with a green flag in his hand. "What time does this train arrive in the city?" she asked. But the porter could not hear her. He put his hand to his ear, but just then the train rushed into the darkness under the railway bridge. Lally let the window up and sat back into the seat. If the train got in before midnight, she thought, she would ring the night bell of the Franciscan friary and ask for a mass to be said there, and then for her mother's soul. She had heard that masses were said night and day in the friary. She tried to remember where she had heard that, and who had told her, but her thoughts were in confusion. She leaned her head back against the cushions as the train roared